Welcome to the Kolbecast, episode 238. Thank you for joining us. Today, Bonnie and I are joined by speaker, musician, podcaster, and co-founder of the Martin Center for Integration, Pat Millea. Through speaking, the This Whole Life podcast and counseling, the Martin Institute seeks to address the mental health and spiritual needs that so many face today. Pat speaks to us of this idea of integration, how to cultivate resiliency in our children, and shares some of his experience and wisdom from his work. We see what it really means to accompany someone through their hardships and their journeys of faith. We hope that you'll enjoy the show.
Hi there, I'm Bonnie, Kolbe homeschooling mom of 4 lads and lasses, liturgical musician, popcorn, and podcast fanatic.
And this is Stephen, homeschooling father of 5 and chief homeschooling officer for Kolbe Academy.
Today we're getting to visit with Pat Millea from the This Whole Life podcast, which might be familiar to our Kolbecast listeners from episode 227 when we visited with Caitlin Russ, occupational therapist. I first heard her on their podcast, the This Whole Life podcast that Pat hosts with his wife, Kenna. So hi, Pat. Welcome to the Kolbecast.
Thanks so much. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
I draw so much from your podcast. It's a real blessing to me, and I know so many others, and it's neat to get a glimpse into your family life with Kenna and the friends that you have amassed along the way and the wisdom you draw from them. Would you tell us a bit about yourself and your background and so forth?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks. My wife, Kenna, and I both went to the University of Notre Dame, and we initially met there through just some mutual friends. We didn't really know each other in undergrad, which, the Lord's timing is always funny. But we did a graduate program together for theology at Notre Dame. So we got to be really good friends first with each other, fell in love with the church, fell in love with each other. We both went into parish ministry initially after grad school. So I was primarily in youth ministry, confirmation prep, things like that. Kenna did more faith formation, family formation, things like that in Chicago, and then up in the Twin Cities where we've settled. We got married in 2009, been married for 15 years, have 7 beautiful children who are almost always loud. We drive a 12-passenger van, which is just the least subtle vehicle that you can possibly drive. But among many blessings in our life, we go to a church and a parish and a school that have been blessed with many children, and we're not the only 12-passenger van. So we don't feel too weird where we live. We, about 2.5 years ago, left our parish work and founded the Martin Center for Integration, which is the organization that This Whole Life podcast falls underneath. So here in the Twin Cities and in Minnesota broadly, we do clinical counseling with a team of 10 Catholic therapists, and Kenna herself is a marriage and family therapist. So she kind of is the clinical director for that side. I'm more of a speaker, musician, leader. I get to speak at lots of youth events and parish events, things like that. So we have a speaking and consulting arm around areas of mental health within the Catholic faith. And then we have This Whole Life podcast as well, which is just a great way to get good information in front of people, whether or not they ever need or pursue clinical therapy, just some good resources and skills. So we've been married for 15 beautiful years and excited for many, many more, God willing.
That's beautiful. Your Martin Center for Integration is so interesting, how you came to refine what that means, like what that encompasses and how you approach that. Can you tell us a bit more about that and the various aspects in which you're serving folks?
Yeah, by all means. I'll start with a little more of the abstract, kind of the rationale for what Kenna and my discernment was around the area of integration, and then a little more concrete about the organization itself. I think for years and years, I was in youth ministry for about 15 years, and Kenna, again, was in parish formation. She did a unit of chaplaincy training as well in a hospital setting. So she spent about 6 months doing CPE unit of chaplain training, pastoral service. Both of us were identifying all these different types of wounds and hurt in the lives of God's people. And, some of those people are connected to him in very practical, sacramental ways. And some of those people have no real relationship with God, but the hurt does not discriminate necessarily. Just because someone is living a sacramental life, has a well-grounded family system, that does not spare them from all the different forms of this fallen world that can cause suffering and heartache for us. So we were just seeing all these different ways that people were going through suffering, and we were starting to identify some of the characteristics that allowed someone to be resilient in the face of suffering and even thrive and be redeemed by suffering, where others might be really resentful in the face of suffering, not respond to it well, almost kind of be broken by it at times. And one of the things that we were able to identify was this sense of integration that, we as human beings are not just animals, we're not just angels, we are this body soul union. And when the different parts of us are integrated, then we're able to respond to all the different things that life throws at us in a way that is not always easy, but it's at least manageable because we're able to walk hand in hand with the Lord. We're able to know what we're feeling, what we're thinking, how we choose to act freely and, God willing, within the morality that the Lord's given us, so that integration can lead us in really beautiful directions. And on the other hand, you can look at any version of brokenness within the world, brokenness in the family system, intrapersonal brokenness in terms of mental health or other kind of struggles like that, brokenness of sin. All of that can kind of fall under the umbrella of disintegration, that people choose things that are unhealthy or objectively evil. People will respond to situations in a way that is maybe not very resilient, oftentimes out of this disintegration, that their body, their soul are not on the same page, and that they're not being attentive to both of those core facets of their personhood. So that we started kind of dreaming about, all right, what would it look like to help people develop the skills to achieve greater integration in their lives? It sounds silly almost, or maybe trite, but how can we help people be more human? How can we help them respond to the world in the way that God intended for us to live? One of the quotes that we throw around a lot in our work here is the quote from Saint Irenaeus of Lyon, that the glory of God is a human being fully alive. So if it's true that the Lord is glorified by our full living, what does it mean to help someone really thrive? Not just to get through another day with a bunch of kids who have to eat food and whatever, not just to get through another work day, just survive and kind of get to bed and wake up the next day, but to really thrive. So for years, Kenna had been nagging at me to open a Catholic mental health clinic, and I would be the administrator and she would be the first therapist. And I told her for a long time, darling, I love you too much to work with you. That's a terrible idea. But it turns out she was right, as usual. And so we founded the Martin Center about 2.5 years ago. And it's been really beautiful. And I would say even maybe anointed in a lot of ways. But one of the ways is just the growth that God has given to this kind of work. I think in the field of mental health, it's been a really problematic field from a Catholic perspective for a long time. And, here in the Twin Cities, I'm sure in other parts of the country and the world, good Catholics who desire good mental health care have really not had a lot of great options at times in terms of resources and specific therapists who, even if the therapist is not Catholic, they at least have a base level of respect and appreciation for someone's value system and their own faith background. So it's been a real incredible blessing just to be able to gather this team of practicing sacramental Catholics who can give that kind of resource and that kind of support to the community, at least here in Minnesota and hopefully beyond someday.
I have this through line of gratitude that this exists, and knowing the necessity of how needed it is, and that you're able to kind of broach the conversation in the first place, which oftentimes I find very difficult. Like, what do those initial conversations look like? How do we approach, if we recognize within ourselves or within our loved ones or people around us that disintegration, I mean, that has these signs. It has become increasingly important to me over the years to address that in the first place, and to do so charitably to both of us. And so what are some of your starting points for kind of entering into some of those conversations? Context being important, of course. Anyhow, do you have any sort of basic ones?
Yeah, I think a lot of times it, like many things, I was just at an event at our parish this morning, and our associate pastor is a great guy. And he was, we were talking about a big topic, just this kind of cultural movement topic. And he brought up the word accompaniment. And he goes, I sometimes kind of hate that word, but I think it's really valid and useful here, and, I think when people hear the term accompaniment, sometimes they think of like this soft, squishy, like you're going to deny objective truth because you just want to accompany people. And when I say accompaniment, that is not what I mean. I don't think that's what any, genuine Catholic means when they say that, because I think there is this necessity for being with people and for taking the risk to walk with people who are broken. You know, sometimes we have no choice but to do that, right? Like as parents, I am broken. I'm married to a broken spouse. All of our kids are broken because we are fallen. We're all sinful. We're all in need. So just by nature of being in a family, I'm going to kind of rub up against the brokenness in other people. But just because I'm in a family and I don't quote unquote have the option to separate or distance myself from them physically, it's certainly possible for family members to distance themselves from each other relationally, when my brokenness rubs up against Kenna's and when we have the natural disagreements that come up in a marriage, it would be tempting and frankly easier sometimes just to avoid or to distance or to busy ourselves with other things so we don't have to have the hard conversations and we don't have to forgive and choose to really move toward each other, turn toward each other in love. So I think the first move is just the willingness to be with someone who is broken and to, as best we can, being different people, experience that with them. And I think a lot of times what can flow from that is an opportunity just to ask, like, what's it like to be you? The friend of mine who's dealing with an addiction, what's it like to be you? What are the feelings of shame and self-pity that you have? What are the ways that you do have hope for healing and recovery, but you just haven't seen any real growth in that yet, for a kid who's lonely because they have a hard time making friends and they just, for whatever reason, they don't connect well with their peer groups. They're not into what their friends are into, what their classmates are into, what their neighbors are into. Just being with a kid, what's it like to be lonely? How does that feel? My heart breaks for you. I can't feel what you feel because I'm not you, but I also know what it's like to be lonely, and I can't imagine how difficult that is. And I think in conversations like that, what we found is there are often ways to connect some of those beautiful objective truths that I was talking about to someone's specific brokenness, that there were saints that were lonely. I'm convinced that even on a human level, no one has ever been lonelier in human history than Jesus on the cross, that he has been stripped of his clothing, his friends, his reputation, his physical comfort. Like all of his friends have turned their back on him. He was betrayed by a friend himself, and he's just in the depth of isolation and loneliness and not despair, but close enough to despair on a human level that he cries out, "Why have you forsaken me, God?" And there are moments, I think, that we can inject little sources of hope and redemption even into the midst of someone's brokenness. That C.S. Lewis talks a lot about this, that even the things that we desire, even the things that are unfulfilled in this life, are actually a sign that we were made for something that does fulfill that desire, right? So if even the best experiences in this life still leave us kind of restless, like St. Augustine, if they leave us a little bit like, but is that really it? We have the great gift as Catholics to be able to say, no, that's not it. Like, you weren't made just to get good grades and get a good job and to live in a big house. You weren't made to just have a nice marriage that people admire. You weren't made to just have kids that are respectful and that your friends compliment you on your parenting. Like, even the good things, you weren't made for those things. So there's hope in the midst of brokenness.
I think the notion of being able to stand in that space, sort of tolerate, to borrow a term that comes up. We've had the good fortune and blessing to speak with Dr. Kevin Majors a couple of times, and he talks about sort of this tolerance to distress tolerance, basically. So
Right.
I have that kind of on the brain. And the willingness and ability to be in that uncomfortable space with someone, that takes a lot, and it signals a lot, I think. And I think that requires so much of this integration that you're working to help us cultivate. Um, so moving in that direction, the humanity that we encounter in its whole gamut is very much front and center. So could you talk to us a bit about working towards integration and then maintaining it? Along the way, I would think that requires cultivating some resilience.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that idea for many reasons, but most recently, especially, it's come up a lot for me and for our family, for our kids, and for a lot of the conversations that we've had lately. Because first of all, in terms of the distress tolerance, like you're talking about, I think that has a lot to do with resilience as well. And the reason I say that is we had one of our podcast episodes on This Whole Life was about free will and others, and how we tolerate the the really agonizing struggle of watching people do things that we know they shouldn't be doing, right?
Yeah.
Um, and there's no easy answer. It's too simple to say, well, just admonish the sinner, go tell them what to do, you know. That is a spiritual work of mercy. Please admonish the sinner. That is 100% a good choice. But admonishing the sinner, I'm pretty convinced, doesn't mean just pointing out someone's flaws and then turning tail and leaving them to sit with that, you know. Um, on the other hand, I don't think it does us any favors to just let people pursue paths and actions and behaviors that are destructive, you know. I wouldn't let my children play in the street just because they told me there's so much space out there and it's bigger than our backyard, right? Because it's dangerous out there, and it's my duty to help protect them from things that are dangerous. And if that's dangerous for their body, I care even more about their soul, right? Um, so in the face of that, kind of watching other people go through difficult things and even choose difficult things, there can be a tendency, maybe especially for parents, to want to fix things for other people, to want to take care of their problems and make their life better. And part of that comes from a really good, very understandable, loving place for a parent, that any parent sees their child suffering and they want their child to not suffer because they love their child, right? Mary at the foot of the cross, I'm sure, did not want Jesus to suffer. But on the other hand, there's this tricky dynamic where we can, as parents, at times cause harm to our children by not allowing them to go through harmful things. Oftentimes it's motivated, you know, a little bit by that very understandable, loving parental instinct, like I talked about. But frankly, some of it comes down to, you know, when my child is suffering, when they are brokenhearted, when they've gotten in trouble at school, when they go through a breakup, when they fail a driver's test, when they're having a hard time with their first steps, whatever level that is, it's hard for me as a parent to watch my child struggle. So there are times that in my fallenness, I want to fix my child's problem, not only for their benefit, but actually for my benefit too. And maybe I don't even know that. Maybe it's on kind of a subconscious level, but I want to address my distress by trying to address theirs, you know? So I think the first level is maybe getting to really having some time to consider that as a parent. And, you know, for the beautiful homeschoolers out there, as a parent and teacher, you know, what does it mean to tolerate hardship in even the education of my family? And to really even pray with that, like, Lord, I'm not comfortable when my children are struggling. And I know that there are times that it's important for them to struggle, but I need your help with this because I can't do it on my own. I'm too weak to watch them struggle and just sit there, you know. The other concept with resilience that I think is really fruitful is a lot of it comes from the book The Anxious Generation, which I'm sure some of your listeners are familiar with. Jonathan Heidt is a great author, sociologist, psychologist, about the issues around mental health, especially related to adolescence and technology and social media in particular. And he brings up this concept of anti-fragility, that out in nature, there are things that are fragile, like eggs. If you throw an egg against the wall, it's going to break because it's fragile. There are things that are hard, like walnuts, and if you throw that against the wall, it's not going to break because it has this hard, resilient shell on the outside. But there's this other category of things in nature that are what he calls anti-fragile, that they they actually become more resilient when they are faced with opposition and hardship and stress. So, for example, there are trees out in nature that they become stronger with every storm because as the wind blows against one side of the tree, all the cells on the back side of the tree will firm up and harden and connect to each other more strongly to hold up the tree against the wind. And even the root systems, the roots will grab into the dirt more strongly. Aspen trees are famous for creating a community of trees that they'll actually interlock roots with each other so that they can withstand the storms, up in the mountains together. And they're anti-fragile. They become stronger. They actually need stress to be able to withstand the stronger storms as they get taller and the wind is even stronger. And if you took that tree and you planted it in like a biodome somewhere that was protected from all the elements, and you gave it everything you needed, it had all the sunlight, all the nutrition, it had everything it needed, and it grew up really tall. If you took it out of that little vacuum environment and you planted it back in a natural forest, the very first storm would knock it over because it has not developed the resilience that it needs to withstand the storms that come at it out in the world. So what Jonathan Heidt proposes, and I think he's 100% right, is that human beings, and especially young, growing human beings that we call children, are anti-fragile. That human development, the course of good, normal, and healthy human development means that we need stress, struggle, hardship, and even pain to be able to create the kind of resilience it takes to be an adult in a fallen, messed up world. That, to be a 22-year-old who doesn't know what to do with their life, and they have to live in this tension of like college, work, military, mission work, who knows what I'm called to live in that distress, that tension, and to be able to make a capable, coherent decision forward in terms of discernment and vocation. Maybe they did have to be a 5 and 6-year-old who was in a room full of peers and they don't know who to play with. They don't know what to do. They had to sort out who to be connected to, how to make the right choices, how to speak. They had to learn that on the fly, Maybe for someone to be in high school and to learn how to cope with a really bad grade. Maybe they had to be 4, 5, 6 years old, climb a tree and fall down and get a cut on their arm. And they had to learn that, okay, that hurts. But I discovered that I heal even when I'm hurt a little bit and I can get tougher from it. That kind of anti-fragility, I think, is really valuable for us as parents to allow, and I would even say to encourage things that are a little bit risky and a little bit dangerous for our children to do so that we can help create the kind of adults who can live in a world that is not ordered to their good oftentimes. And there's the ultimate caveat, of course, that I would never as a parent put my child in harm's way of something that is a literal threat to life or limb. I don't want traumatic experiences for them, right? Jonathan Heidt uses a phrase in the book, we want bruises, not scars, right? I want my children to have small harms early instead of big harms so that they can develop the resilience it takes to face a broken world later on.
With a lot of these conversations, when you started out with accompaniment, and since both Bonnie and you are musicians, of course, that version of it occurred to me, and that it's just sticking throughout this conversation because when you're accompanying somebody, you're not the star. It's all about them, and you're doing what you can to make their performance even better, to make it everything it could be. So I think everything you've said so far to me, it just keeps coming back. It's like with your children, it's not about you. It's about accompanying them and preparing them to be able to be children of God. So you have to let them fall. You have to let them get bruised, and my wife is better at this than I am. She's always pushing a little bit. Like, I know you don't want to do this, but you're going to have to go do this thing. And I'm like, oh, but that's going to make them so uncomfortable. But that's the point. They need to be made uncomfortable so that it's not that anxiety doesn't, they'll be anxious, but then they'll see, of course, that they can make it through, even though it seems scary or whatever at first. But
Hmm. Hmm. And it can be really hard, I think, as parents in particular, to detach ourselves from my worth, my value, maybe even my dignity being tied up in what my children present to the world.
Yeah.
It's a really scary, it's a really intimate thing to release our children out into the world, knowing full well that they are an assessment of us in some way, right? Um, some of that is natural, that the way someone parents certainly does have an effect on their children. And God willing, we're doing everything we can to create kids that are moral and respectful and prayerful and socially aware and all those good things. But it would be to a bridge too far to say that when my kids do good things, I am good. And when my kids fail, I am a failure as a parent. And I think oftentimes, at least I'll speak for myself, I know that intellectually. Like I know that my children and their behavior does not define the state of my soul or my goodness in the eyes of God. But at the level of the heart, it's hard to remember that sometimes on the level of the way I feel, because man, the days that we get a note home from a teacher, our kids go to Catholic school and a beautiful Catholic school, but the days that we get a note home from a teacher about one of our kids and their poor behavior, that cuts deep, that's hard for me to stomach as a parent. And I have so many good homeschooling friends who have, they have homeschooling co-ops, and they have all these beautiful communities, and same kind of deal, stuff comes up in homeschooling co-ops just like it does in brick and mortar traditional school. And so when there are issues of bullying or exclusion or hardship, and my kid is at the source of some of that stuff, oh man, it just hurts. And so much of it, again, I keep going back to prayer, maybe because that's the only way that I can sort through some of this stuff usually. But um, I think the more that we can be consoled in our childhood of God, that even as a parent, my value doesn't come from the behavior of my kids. I think that can give us the freedom sometimes to help form and shape them in a way that's not so desperate. Like I don't want my kids to be good, because then they will show the world that I'm good. So again, it's not ultimately about me, like you said, Stephen. I want my children to be good because I believe it's good for them, right? They're not earning heaven. We're not Jansenists here. There's no moral staircase to heaven. I want them to be good because I believe it's ultimately good for them, that they'll be closer to the Lord, they'll have greater human relationships if they can be the kind of a person that lives within the law of love, And that's a hard thing for a parent to go through. It's not a one and done thing, and it'll be the project of every parent for the rest of their lives. But it's really crucial, I think.
I think especially with the kids, because you love them so much as well. I mean, for me, I think it's partially that that same thing that you're talking about, wanting your child to act perfectly and be thought of well, is basically we impose that on ourselves too, and we beat ourselves up. So it seems like it's one of the first steps would be to kind of recognize that in yourself, and then say, okay, you know, I'm not if I'm not going to if I'm going to relieve that tension from myself, that misery of I have to be perfect to be loved or to be good, then I can maybe make that next step and walk with my child and help, because I can see, okay, yeah, you mess up. I'll, like you say, correct gently. You're gently correcting because you love them. You want them to not cause problems for the classroom or not get in trouble that way. But you're also seeing that doesn't define them as a person. It doesn't define you as a person with those
Hmm.
breaks.
Hmm. Right, right.
Okay, well, I am really glad that the timing is working out as it is, because I wanted to get your thoughts on the holidays, where this episode, when it drops, is during the season of Advent, just before Christmas. Lots going on. Um, everything is kind of pitched up quite a bit intensity wise. And so all of our efforts at integration and resilience and charity and everything, all of those are put to the test and really brought into real sharp relief. So how do you like to approach the holidays with all that in mind?
I can't remember who it was. I want to say it was a boxer at some point, maybe a few years ago. But someone once said, everyone has a plan until they get punched in the face. Which it's just such a beautiful, stark reality of like, yeah, I have all these dreams and visions, but then like reality hits and what am I really all about, you know?
Yeah. Yep.
I do think there is great value going into any season where there's going to be stress and hardship. You know, for some people, it's the time between Thanksgiving, Christmas around then. For some people, it is maybe if the schedule of the typical school year lightens up a little bit in the summer. You know, I know on a homeschooling schedule, you can kind of create your own, choose your own adventure in terms of how the summer looks. But sometimes when the summer is less ordered, that can be a struggle for people to maintain sanity in the case of a little more chaos, right? When there's a transition in a job, when there's a move, when there's a death of a loved one, all these things can create upheaval in things that were going so well before that, right? So I do think there's value before a time like that hits to be connected to God and to be connected with God about what are my values, what are my priorities, and then to be connected to the people that I'm close to so that we all can choose to live out those values and those priorities. So, you know, in our family, we both budget wise and values wise, we're not going to get our kids like an Xbox or an iPad or something like that, right? Like that is not on the table. So we don't do letters to Santa Claus because it's a fruitless exercise. Like our kids are just going to be disappointed if we do that. I all my understanding goes to the people that do letters to Santa. I think it's a great practice for some. It just is not going to be a good idea for us. So, so Kenna and I have to go into the Advent, the Christmas season, being intentional about, all right, our values are our faith, that this is a time of spiritual preparation. It's a time of prayer. It's a time of connection to the Lord, getting ready for the incarnation at Christmas, but also his final coming at the end of our lives as well, being vigilant and ready for him at all times. One of our values is family, of course. So in the midst of the unavoidable busyness of Advent and Christmas, how can we be connected to each other in meaningful ways? So not just that, you know, again, our kids go to Catholic school. So not just that we happen to be home together after Christmas break begins, but like intentional time together. What are we doing together? We don't have to spend every minute of every day together. That would be silly. And that would create probably more problems than it would solve. But in the ways that we choose to, how can we play games together? How can we pray together? How can we get outdoors and be in nature together? How can we really create the kind of life that we believe God desires for our family together? Not by accident, but intentionally, you know. One of our priorities is giving each other, for Kenna and I, the space to do some good, healthy self-care as well. You know, self-care, similar to accompaniment, can spin off in the wrong direction, right? Self-care can become self-indulgence pretty quickly, but the way we like to talk about it is self-care is meant for the sake of self-gift. So what do I need as a husband, as a father, in order to be healthy enough to be the kind of a gift to my bride and to my children and to my work that I need to be? And if I'm not caring for myself well, I can't make a gift of myself well to others. So in the midst of a busy season like this, just being really clear with your spouse, with your kids, hey, listen, it's really important to me to have 20 minutes of quiet in the evenings. Whether you're in the room or not is totally fine, but it's going to be quiet, right? Just 20 minutes to pray, to recover whatever I need from the day. Both Kenna and I, one of the ways that we get out some of the stress that can build up throughout the day is exercise. So we'll give each other specific times to get away from the house, to go work out in the basement or at the gym or go for a run, something like that, right? And the reason I think those conversations matter beforehand is when you're in the thick of it, when you do get punched in the nose, so to speak, when there is, you have a million gifts to buy and it's December 22nd, when things do not go the way you planned, it doesn't change the values, right? Like what I choose to do might be different than I had anticipated. The reality that is in front of me is not what I wanted. It's not the ideal situation. So, okay, the circumstances are different. What's not different is my values. So I may have to choose different things than I had originally planned, but I'm still going to live within my values. And, for all the disappointment that can come with things not going exactly the way I envisioned them. And I have to apologize to Kenna like on a yearly basis because I am the ultimate lover of Christmas. I love Christmas more than I love most worldly things. And I have some very unfair Clark Griswold dreams for every single Christmas where I want it to go this particular perfect way. It's going to be the best Christmas ever. And then every year, December 26th, I have this like withdrawal of like, but it wasn't quite perfect, and Kenna's like, would you stop creating these ridiculous expectations? So when that happens, when reality doesn't meet my expectations, I can still live within my values. And even when things don't go the way I want, there is this sense of peace that comes with being, again, integrated. That, the decorations didn't get put up the way I wanted them to this year, or the shopping didn't go the way I wanted it to. Christmas dinner was kind of a disaster this year, and the turkey was dry or whatever. Okay, that's fine. How did we do with our values? How did we do with prayer, with family, with connection to God and others? I think that's a really valuable practice for folks to consider.
It seems like those value things are also really important if you're if you're doing the right thing, I think, and making space for family and for whatever you're doing over the holidays. At least for me, I find it more fruitful when I keep in mind that this is space to relax, to give yourself some of the things, certainly, but also to work towards those values. What is it this is an opportunity for me to say, read something that I've been waiting to read for, or to play games with the kids when I don't normally have that time. Whereas it seems like the alternate is trying to kind of escape, when you're just like, I just want to get away from all of the stress, all of the anxiety, all of the stuff that's built up. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to sit there scrolling on my phone for an hour, and then I'll, indulge myself in whatever way to just make myself feel better and not think about all of the other stuff. But if I can avoid that and instead think like, oh, great, I have the opportunity today to do something that I can't normally do with the people I love, let's do it. That's makes it, that even in those things, to me, that makes a huge difference.
And that's a great example, that escape that you're talking about, Stephen, is a great example of disintegration too, right? That the examples that you gave, none of those are objectively evil things, right? Watching a movie, looking at Instagram, having a bowl of ice cream, none of those are evil things. Even things, for us as Catholics, we know, like alcohol itself, not objectively evil. So having a glass of wine, having an old fashioned in the evening, something like that, not objectively evil for most people. But all of those are very effective ways of numbing out and of separating soul and body. That my soul is perturbed, my soul is anxious, and because I don't want to pay attention to that, it is much more easy to just play a video game or scroll social media or have one too many drinks. We as bodily creatures have very effective ways of numbing out and avoiding the difficulties of our life. And of course, the irony is that numbing out never actually deals with the anxiety or the stress. It just delays it, sometimes even exacerbates it or creates a new problem to add to the one that we were already feeling anxious about. And typically that kind of behavior also distances us from others, one of my many flaws as a parent is all the times that I am willing to just scroll on my phone with a child literally talking to me, right? That I'm actively ignoring them, or I'm saying just a second, just 1 second, and I'm just, who knows what I'm doing? I can't remember what I'm doing. It's that pointless, right? um, we are pretty good at distancing ourselves from others when we feel the need to just escape and run away. And it's so hard. It is so hard. And so I don't say it lightly when I say that the best times in my life, and I think for all the people that we get to encounter here, when I am feeling distress or burdened or just weighed down by the busyness of the season or whatever's on my plate, to make the really difficult move of turning toward the people that I'm connected to and just sharing with them how things are going. And it is so risky because internally my fear is, well, they're not going to care, or they won't appreciate it, or they won't really know how I'm feeling, or they'll tell me to just get over it and stop whining or something like that, right? And sometimes we are met with those responses and we know how much that hurts, but man, that kind of a move is so valuable, if the alternative is just running from the feeling, right? I just think that this is a great season, like you said, to really dig in, to move toward those opportunities for connection, and to not just like dissociate from the struggles because it's easier to not think about them right now.
As Catholics, at times, at least I was introduced to this idea of offering it up, which sometimes becomes a little trite. Is that the right word? It becomes, it's unkind, to just, at times it can be to say to offer it up. But I think fundamentally, as I've thought about this particularly over the last year, that it's exactly that's offering it up, because, we can't get rid of the thoughts we have that are intrusive, or the feelings or the pain at times. It's there and we can't make it go away. And, so offering it up, whether to our Lord and saying, I have this feeling of, depression, of anxiety that's here. Walk with me, Lord. Or to my spouse, I am just feeling super down today, and I can't make it go away, but they're there. My experience when I do that is, that's offering it up to have somebody help you carry that burden, and it is lightened usually. And even if it's not, at least you're there with somebody that loves you, and so thumbs up to that.
I think of the Israelites in the desert in particular, that like you said, offering it up. The way it sometimes comes across is, stop whining,
Yes.
you complainer. It just, and sometimes like when grandma says it, maybe that's actually even what she means. And, so whatever, it can get kind of off kilter a little bit, but fundamentally, like, the beauty of redemptive suffering is real. And, the Israelites wandered in the desert for 40 flipping years, which is way too long for me to be lost and aimless. So they had left this place of slavery and suffering, this place of like the ultimate distress, where they were surrounded by false gods, they were surrounded by all the useless slavery and serving people that were worshiping, false gods, people that weren't the true God of Israel. And he's bringing them to a place of promise, right? He's bringing them to a land of milk and honey. There is a fulfillment to the promise he has made them, but in between, they're just wandering, and the wandering itself is a form of suffering. And they even say that. They say, like, I want to go back to Egypt, like anything but here, God. I'm tired of wandering. At least there we had meat in pots, never mind that we were living in sin and blah blah blah, whatever. We had food.
Yeah.
And all the time God is raining down literal food from heaven, but they're like, well, this is not good enough. But at their best, in their times of faithfulness, the Israelites were really able to do what you're talking about. They were able to just be present to the reality. Right now, we are not where we want to be, but I would rather move forward than back. And I do believe that the Lord has made me a promise, and I believe that He is the kind of God who keeps His promises. So I'm going to keep walking with the Lord. And I actually don't even know where we're going, but I trust that if I go with Him, I'm going in the right direction. And importantly, it's a community of Israelites, right? This is not just one guy walking alone in the desert like a hermit. Like, they're connected to their family, they're connected to their community, they're going together. So um, even when they don't have all the answers, they at least don't have the answers together, and they can know that they're not alone because they have a pillar of fire and they have their friends next to them. whether it's Christmas, Advent, or just anything else going on in somebody's life. I think that is a really stark image for people to move in the more painful, more kind of uncertain direction of hope instead of retreating back to something that is worse, but at least you know what it is. So it feels tempting in the moment, you know?
And I guess it fits right in with the prior conversation because both, like when you're thinking about the Israelites, it is that sort of, okay, well, I'm in this horrible spot. I can't change that, but it's that idea of, but I can choose my response to it. It can be, I wish I could just get some better food so that I don't have to think about this or go back to that as well. Or I can live according to my values and say, okay, I don't like this. I hate it, but I'm going to keep walking forward there too. So yeah, it just fits together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that right understanding of agency and free will is just so valuable that and maybe most of all with the folks that we encounter in young adults, you know, maybe in those kind of 20-30 age range, um, oftentimes people feel really paralyzed by what they see as a lack of their own agency. They don't feel capable. They don't feel confident. They feel like any decision they make is going to be the wrong decision. So they end up just paralyzed. You know, they don't get a driver's license because they're afraid they're going to wreck something. They don't go to college or go get a job because they're afraid they're going to get fired or flunk out. You know, just there's that fear that can come from not having a full awareness and a full expression of my agency. And you know, certainly we as people of free will can use our free will poorly, and thank God we have a merciful God in response to that. But man, the use of agency rightly is just such a beautiful thing. Yeah.
The sense of developing that sense of agency has risen up the ladder of my priority list here of cultivating that in my kids. Like, you have agency. Yes, it needs to be rightly ordered. You're not helpless. They're used to hearing me say that now.
Ken is really good at that with our kids in a lot of ways, but like when, you know, we have a 12-year-old son, and he when the little kids go to bed about 7:30, he will eat until he goes to bed. Basically, he's just in that age range of like, we're just bracing ourselves. The grocery bill is already absurd, and it's only going to get worse. We have three boys in a row, and many evenings he'll ask Kenna, "Hey, can I have some ice cream, or can I have some, you know, some probably not ideal food at the end of a day?" And she'll put it back on him. Say like, well, when you think about what you've had today, when you think about what your body needs, when you think about the way that you're going to get your best sleep tonight to be ready for tomorrow, what do you think a good choice is when it comes to ice cream? Now, you'll be shocked to know he oftentimes discovers that he thinks ice cream is the perfect choice for himself,
Sure, yeah,
right?
yeah.
But that's the thing, like that is a short-term price that we are willing to pay because we believe that if and when there are natural consequences to a poor choice that's pretty innocuous, frankly, when it comes to ice cream at night, that he will be able to, with our help, discern those consequences and make a better choice next time, right? And it's a tiny little micro example of what you're talking about, but when we get down the road and there are much more significant questions, we're not going to be able to tell him what college to go to, who to date, where he should live as an adult. Like, those are choices that he will have to make, maybe with our input if he still wants it at that stage, God willing. But giving him the skills that it takes to make a decision that are for his good and the good of others is a really beautiful gift parents can give their kids.
For sure. Okay. Well, as we're coming to the end of our time here together today, I would love to hear some of your stories or observations from the time you've spent speaking to groups, large and small, youth events, the trainings that you do. What kind of stories do you have for us?
Oh, so many. I mean, what's funny is there's some kind of like macro thing, macro observations, and then maybe a little more micro, so I can start at the higher level.
Okay.
I think on a macro level, what's funny is, you know, I'm convinced human nature doesn't really change all that much. The ways that we express our needs, our sins, our weaknesses, our desires, they might change from age to age, but I think human nature has been pretty consistent from scripture until now. Um, some of the things that I've seen change in the expression of it is definitely in some of the audiences that I work with teens, but even adults, I would say, attention span is just tricky right now. And I think it always has been. I mean, 14-year-olds cannot listen to a 35-minute lecture without being bored. I don't care who the speaker is. But anymore, I mean, statistically, we know that attention spans have dropped consistently for the past couple decades. But I can see it with a group of high school and particularly middle school kids. Like, if there's not a strategic effort to like tell a joke, break it up with a story, show a goofy meme on the screen, like whatever it takes to re-engage, then a lot of adolescents will just be lost after 4 or 5 minutes, and it doesn't mean they don't care. It doesn't mean they're not interested or that they're being disrespectful. What it means is they are living in a world that is conditioning them to stop caring after about 20 seconds, right? I mean, just pick a YouTube video or a TikTok, Instagram, like even an ad on TV. Like, there is a scene change, and if I don't like what I'm watching, I'll just flick to the next one. In 4 seconds, I will know if I should keep watching this or not, right? So here I come with a microphone. They can't just scroll past me. Good luck, man. Like, entertain me or you're toast. So I think that has become a little bit increasingly tricky, not insurmountable by any means, but just tricky. I think there can be a little bit too what I've seen. And again, I think this has always been here. I definitely was a victim of this and guilty of it myself. But this just like ennui about the gospel, you know? And a lot of it is kids that come from great families. Maybe they were homeschooled, maybe they went to Catholic school, but they've just grown up around the faith, right? So to their credit, they know a ton. They know more scripture than I know now. And they're 16 years old, right? They can quote church doctors. They have read half the Summa. You know what I mean? Like, intellectually, they have so many tools because they've been just immersed in the faith for so many years. But so many of them just, they'll hear things like Christ died for your sins so you could have eternal glory. And there's just this kind of internal shrug, like, yeah, okay, all right. You have freedom available to you because the Lord desires your fullness, your flourishing. Yeah, I know. Yeah, whatever. And that, oh man, it's just so hard. I mean, it's the typical revelation. Like, I'd rather you be hot or cold, but this lukewarm thing is really insidious and it's really, really hard. So there's a lot of audiences I'm in front of where there's a lot of things that I'll try to do to just shake people up a little bit and just like, whether it's getting a little bit firm, not harsh, please God, but firm to help them see that like this stuff matters and it's a life or death type conversation, or to be a little bit surprising maybe and try to sneak in under the tripwire, so to speak, like come from a direction that they don't anticipate, that they can't predict. That's been kind of a growing edge for me too, I think. On a micro level, I just am constantly amazed at all the ways that the Holy Spirit can use an idiot like me in so many different ways. I shouldn't be surprised because he's been doing it since Moses, like Moses had no qualifications. Paul was basically a murderer. Like, it should not be a shock to me at all. But years back, I was at a youth conference out in the San Diego diocese, speaking to a bunch of high schoolers. And in the course of this talk, I told a story about my friend John, who had a sister Colleen who died when she was like 36. So on the face of it, from the eyes of the world, is just meaningless. It's just a waste. Like, at the height of her human capabilities, her life came to an end, seemingly pointless. But you and I know, as people of faith, that no life is pointless, that God has a plan for everyone's life, and that the end of their life here on earth is not the end of their life with him, right? So, was making points about eternity and about meaning and what it means to really have a life well lived, even if it's only for a short number of years, And at lunch that day, it was in this gym, and I went to go sit with this group of high schoolers in the bleachers and eat my lunch because they looked like they were going to be friendly to a weird adult like me. So we were just talking about sports and books and friends and normal high school stuff. And lunch gets over, and one of the youth ministers came up to me and said, "Hey, why did you go sit with those girls?" And I was like, "They look nice. I don't know. I have no deeper reflection than this." Um, she said, their mom left them when they were young, like 2, 3, 4 years old. These were all siblings. And she said their dad just died last month.
Oh, wow.
And he had died from the exact same kind of osteosarcoma bone cancer that I had just described my friend's sister Colleen dying from 2 hours before that, you know? And this girl came up to me afterward and did not have some big like emotional moment or anything significant like that, but just asked some really beautiful, very innocent, material, practical questions. Like, hey, was your friend's sister, did she hurt a lot when she died? You know?
Mm.
How did your friend feel after that? Like, what was he going through? You know? Just like I like to think I can be an intelligent person sometimes, but like there is no explanation for that. There's no grand plan that I have about telling this one particular story with this one particular family in the room, you know. And beautifully their parish had risen up. They had already, you know, been kind of swarmed by love. They had great care. They were taken in, and they're doing very well. But for every one of those, there are 20 other stories like that that I have experienced, and you know, probably dozens more that I will never hear, but were going on in the background. Just the reality, the beautiful recognition that I've been able to be a witness of, that like there is a spiritual background going on in every moment of our lives, that for everything that we can see, there are things happening behind the scenes that are even more significant, and we get to play a part in those. It's really humbling. And you don't have to have a microphone in your hand to be a part of that story. You know, like every parent, every worker, every priest, every child of God has a part to play in that, and to see the way the Spirit uses them.
Oh, what a beautiful story. What a consolation to them. I'm sure you were. It's really been a gift getting to visit with you today. I sure appreciate the time you've taken to spend with us. I know there are episodes of the This Whole Life podcast on several of the themes we touched upon, resilience and transition and regulation and navigating changes and free will. That I think that's one of the early ones, right? I was listening to that one the other day.
Yeah.
So we will have links in our show notes to the Martin Center website, and there's a page within that for the podcast, and of course it's on the podcast player. So I highly encourage folks to check that out. Are there other resources or other sites that you want to direct us to as well?
Yeah, you can just check us out, martincenterforintegration.com, like you mentioned. If you are of the social media type, then we do lots of fun stuff on Instagram with just updates on events that we're doing, and little posts from episodes. So the handle is This Whole Life Podcast on Instagram. And if you're in Minnesota, we'd love to connect. Feel free to reach out. And we always love kind of growing the network of a small church, even though it's universal. So yeah, it's a blessing. Thank you.
Good deal. Well, Pat, we sure appreciate it, and all the blessings upon the work that you're doing and on your family. Thanks again for coming today.
Thanks so much. You guys will be in our prayers too. Thanks for all your good work.
Appreciate that a lot.
Subscribe to the Kolbecast on your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss an episode. And let us know how we're doing by leaving a rating or a review. And as always, feel free to email us at podcast@kolbe.org.
Mary, our Mother, pray for us. St. Maximilian Kolbe, St. Ignatius of Loyola, holy saints and angels, pray for us. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam.